Greetings and welcome. My name is Frank Murdoch and I'm the host of today's ASQ Lean Enterprise Division webinar. We hold these webinars once a month and they are free to all of our members. Our webinars are recorded, so previous webinars are available on the ASQ Lean Enterprise Division YouTube channel. Now on September 12th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern, 10:30 a.m. Pacific time, Aaron Lord, Lisette Contreras, and Ellen Noss will be presenting our next webinar entitled Gain a Competitive Edge in Retailing Through Lean Warehousing. Very different application of Lean. But today, our webinar presenter is Lance Coleman, who's principal consultant with Full Moon Consulting. Lance's topic is Maybe at Risk but Not in Peril, Lean Risk Management. I want to also make sure that people are aware that we have our upcoming Lean Practitioners Summit on November 1st and 2nd in Pomona, California. That should be a really good meeting. We've got some 4 tours and we've got some hands-on workshops for that. So some logistics, everyone should be on mute, but you are free to post questions to Lance as you think of them. Lance has reserved about 10 minutes at the end of his presentation to answer questions, and we'll take them one at a time. Here is Lance Coleman.
Thank you very much, Frank. Greetings to everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar. So just a little bit about my background. I am the present chair of the ASQ Lean Enterprise Division. I'm an instructor for the ASQ CQA exam preparatory course. Been a voting member of US tags 176 and 302, as well as the chair of tag 302. I've authored several books, and I'll let you read the details. Won't just read the slide to you, but I would like to talk to you briefly just about where the idea for this webinar came from. So often in a time of competing and limited resources, different functions that should be working together are competing against each other. Often Lean Six Sigma is seen as a resource drain. It might draw away from other aspects of the corporation. Similarly, quality management system initiatives might be seen as projects that would take resources away from Lean and Six Sigma efforts. However, they really should be working together synergistically. They're not, yes, they are different functions, but they really should be thought of as different sides of the same coin. And so what I'd like to discuss with you today is how Lean and Six Sigma can support quality management systems, how they can support risk management, which is a huge focus across multiple industries today. I started my session with this quote: when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So what's important? Yes, Max Planck, this is the Max Planck of Planck's constant. But what's most important about this quote is Dr. Planck talks about perspective when he issues this quote. When we think about it, Six Sigma's been promoted and greatly used since the 80s here in the States. Lean, in some form or other, has been robust, promoted since the 50s. If you go back to, even though it has some roots here in America in the early 1900s, if you go back to the 1930s, you've had the use of statistical methods. So none of these things are new, but we can find new uses, new ways to combine different tools and so forth for improved results. And that's what we're going to try to talk about today. Learning objectives. So I'll mention framework. several times throughout, so we'll just ask ourselves, what exactly is a framework? We want to introduce Lean and Six Sigma for those of you who aren't familiar or who are less familiar with it. Introduction to quality management systems, and then the crux of this webinar, how Lean Six Sigma can engage with other frameworks. And we'll conclude with a question and answer. So the definition of a framework from good old Merriam-Webster is a basic conceptual structure as of ideas. So why is it important to understand what a framework is? Well, framework provides perspective. Perspective provides a starting point for how you're going to address a challenge, move along a certain path, and so forth. And by understanding the concept of frameworks, we can also understand when different frameworks can support one another and when they might not work well together. So what exactly is Six Sigma? Well, it's a philosophy of pursuing process improvement with the goal of increasing customer satisfaction. Focus here is that it uses statistical tools to reduce process variation. Follows the D.O.W.N.T.I.M.E, define, measure, analyze, improve, control, problem-solving method. And it's often used in conjunction with Lean. A little bit of a timeline for you. 1777 to 1855 was the lifespan of Carl Friedrich Gauss, who introduced the concept of the normal or bell-shaped curve. In the 1920s, Walter Shewhart introduced the concepts of common cause and special cause variation and the 3 sigma process limits. And these are all relating to normal or bell-shaped curves. 1980s, Six Sigma developed as a practice methodology by Motorola and then spread to other companies throughout the States and worldwide. Now, let's talk about Lean. Lean is a philosophy that embraces respect for the individual, putting the customer first, and the pursuit of perfection in all things. Lean is a system of thought meant to stimulate innovation through the elimination of the various wastes that take up valuable time and resources. It's also a methodology for achieving cycle time reduction. Now, we talked about waste, but when we say waste from the perspective of Lean, we're not just talking about any waste. There are very specific process wastes that exist within any organization or company. Defects, mistakes, errors, defective product, overproduction, producing too much at one time, overloading the next process step so that items subassemblies start to build up and could get in the way or be damaged. Waiting. How often have we been ready to start a job or a task, but we needed one signature or had to go looking for a particular tool? This is all wasted time and effort that could be used to creating value for the customer. Non-utilization, sometimes referred to as sub-optimization. Not utilizing your personnel resources to the fullest. How often have we seen someone that took the trouble to go to school part-time for years, get a degree, and then 2 years later, they're still doing pretty much the same job they have been doing? Or bringing in a high-priced consultant to do training that internal resources could do just as well. And that's not to say that there's not a time when you would want to bring in an outside resource. But again, these are just examples of sub-optimizing, not utilizing to the fullest your employee talent. Transportation, moving things unnecessarily. Simple example of that is when you don't have a warehouse laid out properly. Maybe you have to get a pallet of material and it's behind two other pallets. So you have to move those two pallets, pull the pallet out that you need, put those two pallets back that you moved, take the pallet to the workplace. When you finish, you bring it back, you move those two pallets, you put it back in its original spot. And so lots of extra effort that could have been avoided if the materials that you needed were more accessible. Inventory. Well, how is inventory a waste? Inventory is a good thing, isn't it? Well, inventory has dollar value, true, but it does not really provide value back to the organization until it's transformed, sold, and then payment is received. So yes, you need a certain amount of inventory to get your work done. But if you have overly much, then you're just tying up money that could be used elsewhere for improvement projects or some other important initiatives. Motion. This is actually unnecessary movement of a person. This could be bad ergonomics within a work cell or work session, or it could be a person having to repeatedly walk down a hallway to get something of use or cross a room or something of that sort. And then finally, excess processing. Doing more than the customer has requested. And these activities would be activities that do not provide value. Often excess processing is the result of a response to some issue that was found, and rather than do a robust root cause, say, well, let's just do some extra stuff. So both Lean and Six Sigma are improvement methodologies. What exactly is the difference? Well, Lean drives improvement by reducing process waste and production cycle time. Six Sigma drives improvement by reducing overall process variation and eliminating special cause variation, that variation that comes from some element outside of the normal process that's not expected or normal. Quality management systems. The quality management system consists of interrelated processes. Understanding how results are produced by the system enables an organization to optimize the system and its performance. So this is coming from the ISO website. Now we're starting to get into the crux of this webinar just a little bit. Let's talk about interlacing frameworks. Lean Six Sigma shares key elements with QMS that help support the goals of organizational continual improvement and risk management. Let's see how we know this. Well, there's a similar philosophy with do it right the first time, continue to improve, empower employees. Cultural enablers. Lean Six Sigma and quality management systems thrive in an open environment where sharing of ideas, feedback from all levels of the organization are encouraged, where employee engagement is encouraged. So Lean Six Sigma quality management systems share that as well. And then there are complementary tools and methods. And whether you were looking to compare Lean and Six Sigma, or Lean Six Sigma and quality management systems, or just two other frameworks, you would go about it the same way. You say, well, is there a similar philosophy that people have that engage in these frameworks? Are there similar cultural enablers that allow them to flourish, to sustain? And are there complementary tools and methods? So if you ask yourself these three questions about any two frameworks that you're looking to compare or thought systems, you will be able to understand whether or not they would work together. If the answer is yes to all three, then you should be able to find synergies where these frameworks can work together to improve results in managing risk, improving processes, and whatever types of initiatives you may be engaged with. Now, here we're just going to look at a comparison, partial comparison between Lean Six Sigma and quality management systems. Now, on the right hand, you have the 7 guiding principles that support the quality management system standards that ISO puts out. And on the left, you have some key aspects of Lean and Six Sigma philosophies, thought processes. And you'll see that I've color-coded where there are immediate links. Starting at the top, you have respect for the individual, whereas quality management principle 3 is engagement of people. Use of statistical tools to reduce process variation. Quality management principle 4 is the process approach. Next, you have eliminate waste and reduce cycle time. The philosophy that perfection is attainable. Quality management principle 5 is improvement. PDCA and D.O.W.N.T.I.M.E are iterative problem-solving approaches that form the bedrock of Lean and Six Sigma methodologies, and they provide what's required by quality management principle 6, evidence-based decision-making. Value creation from the perspective of the customer. QMP1 is customer focus. And then lastly, leadership must be engaged for Lean and Six Sigma efforts to be successful. And you see quality management principle 2, leadership. So at every level, Lean Six Sigma philosophies, thought systems mesh with the foundational principles of quality management systems. So we know we've got a good match here. Now let's look at the specifics of how Lean Six Sigma supports quality management system. Lean Six Sigma demonstrates a proactive, data-driven approach to improvement. Lean Six Sigma provides concrete and measurable evidence of improvement activities. By eliminating waste, risk and opportunities both become more visible. So when you don't have so much clutter, and I'm using the term metaphorically now, so it could be physical clutter, but it could be process waste of different types. It's hard to see where the real risks are and where the opportunities are in your processes because too much is in the way. Reducing variation creates greater predictability of process outcomes, which in turn allows for improved strategic planning. If you don't know what you can produce and how much you can produce, how can you plan for the future? Tools such as process maps, value stream maps, failure mode and effect analysis, and cyclone diagrams all facilitate the use and provide evidence of the process approach. The FMEA provides evidence of how risk and opportunities are taken into account during planning and implementation. D.O.W.N.T.I.M.E and PDCA methodologies provide evidence of a logical and fact-based approach to problem solving. So we looked at all these different ways that Lean Six Sigma can support the quality management system. How do we actually engage? Well, too often, Lean Six Sigma programs are off to the side. Often they're not included as part of the quality management system, but they should be brought in, engaged, used to demonstrate how we are implementing our quality management system to the fullest. So often, as a lead auditor, when I've gone into companies and asked, well, can you provide details on your continuous improvement program? How do you address improvement? And the company could have a Lean Six Sigma program. What they're going to tell you is through management review, we look at this data and we respond and improve based on our analysis for management review. Well, that's the easy way out. A quick fix when you're sitting in front of an auditor. But management should be comfortable in talking about their Lean Six Sigma program and engaging with the continuous improvement professionals and be able to explain, well, how does Lean and Six Sigma integrate with the quality management system? Because it should integrate. So I think we've seen at this point how much the Lean and Six Sigma process supports what's going on within the quality management system. And so we need to be able to articulate that as quality professionals to management and make sure that we're breaking down the silos between CI and QA. Let's look at this clause from 9001/2015, speaking about risk and opportunities. When planning for the quality management system, the organization shall consider the issues referred to in 4.1 and 4.2, which is understanding the organization as context, understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties, and determine the risks and opportunities that need to be addressed. So, as a part of planning, management needs to identify risk and opportunities that need to be addressed. We're going to talk about how Lean and Six Sigma supports that initiative and helps the organization manage risk. Now we're drilling down a little deeper. By challenging organizations to plan for risk and opportunities, it's important to realize that ISO for the first time is explicitly recognizing that there are risks associated with efforts to improve. So that's always been the case, but just because you make a change, that doesn't mean that there's not a risk. You could make things worse, you could expend efforts and not have a benefit. So you need to realize there are risks, and you have to assess to see if they're at a level where they should be mitigated. The use of risk assessment as part of the LSS project evaluation process specifically addresses the rewards and opportunities clause. So this is, if you are being audited, this provides objective evidence, but also it gives you a consistent and documented methodology for looking at risk and opportunities. Documents such as project charters and reports provide objective evidence of taking risk into account when planning for improvement. So what exactly is risk anyway? What do we mean by that? We know objectively risk, maybe chance of something bad could happen. But what do we mean by risk in a professional setting? ISO 9001:2015 defines risk as the effect of uncertainty. ISO 31000:2009 defines it as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. ISO 14971:2007 defines risk as the combination of the probability of occurrence of harm and the severity of harm. So the first two, is important to note that Uncertainty is included in both of these definitions. And when you think about it, that makes sense, because when you're uncertain about something, you lack knowledge, you lack surety. And if you lack knowledge, then you're more likely to incur problems, have failures when you pursue a particular course of action. So there's a higher risk of something going wrong. And then 14971 has a very specific definition of risk, specific to medical devices. So how likely is something bad to happen? And in the event that something bad does happen, how bad might it get? So that's your definition of risk for medical devices. ISO 31000 is meant to be used across all industries and speaks to enterprise or business risk. And then back up to ISO 9001:2015, which I feel is actually an evolution of the other two standards, even though it's not specific to a risk, it's a quality management system, but it challenges organizations to understand and manage risk for both products as well as their business. And here we have a sample project charter, and you can see that the risk assessment is embedded right within. So it's embedded into the thought process. Before we pull the resources needed to engage in this project, are there any risks we need to consider? And then looking backwards, it provides evidence that risk was considered before this project was engaged. Balance of the charter. Failure mode and effects analysis is a risk management tool that's used in an attempt to capture every possible failure of a product, design, or process, and the potential effects of those failures. So there are different types of FMEA, failure mode and effects analysis. You have design FMEA, which looks at all the ways a design could go wrong. A process FMEA, it looks at all the ways a process could fail. System FMEA, the way that all the ways an integrated system could fail. And this is not a comprehensive list. There are other types of FMEA, but this is just a sample of the most commonly used ones. So when do we use FMEA anyway? When developing a new product or process, when modifying an existing product or process, troubleshooting by reviewing a product or process, FMEA, in order to identify failure root cause, using an existing product or service in a new application or environment. So these are all times when we might use an FMEA. Now, the caveat with an FMEA is that it's a huge time constraint, resource drain. So you only want to do it on significant efforts or high risk scenarios. Why do we use FMEA? To rate, prioritize, and act on failures using specific criteria. So fact-based decision making. Ensure that you address potential failure modes with the greatest risk first. You reduce risk by actively anticipating what might fail, the mode of failure or the way something fails, the effect of the failure, what are the consequences, and potential options to mitigate the failure. And here's a sample FMEA. Across the top, you have the specific information, what is the item, the model, the core team, the responsibility for this FMEA or team leader. Who was this form prepared by? Typically it would be the team leader, but it does not have to be. The FMEA number, to give it a unique identifier, what page, the origination date, and what revision. because FMEAs are living documents. You create these as part of planning, but then once you go into production, once you start to get feedback from the field, you update it as new information becomes available. And again, a powerful tool, but also an important record to show that risk was taken into account during planning and throughout the product realization phases. So, how does FMEA relate to ISO 9001 2015? Well, clause 4.1 says the organization shall determine external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and strategic direction. Well, the system FMEA can capture overall internal and external risks from the perspective of the customer. And then 5.1.2, top management shall demonstrate leadership and commitment with respect to customer focus by ensuring that the risks and opportunities that can affect conformity of products and services and ability to enhance customer satisfaction are determined and addressed. Well, management commitment is demonstrated by providing resources for training and application of FMEA techniques. The organization shall plan actions to address these risks and opportunities. So again, FMEA is a planning tool. 9.1.3, analyze and evaluate appropriate data. Well, revising the FMEA when it's determined that all risks have not been captured due to internal and external feedback demonstrates data analysis and response, particularly as it pertains to risk. 10.2.1, when a nonconformity occurs, including any arising from complaints, the organization shall update risk and opportunities determined during planning if necessary. Again, revising the FMEA demonstrates the organization's ability and willingness to do that. Proper planning is also an important part of risk mitigation. Because with proper planning, you can help identify not just current, but future risks, plan to mitigate them. D.O.W.N.T.I.M.E is a strategic planning and management methodology developed to capture strategic goals and distill them down to measurable objectives and targeted action items. D.O.W.N.T.I.M.E is the Japanese word meaning compass needle or direction, and Kanri means management or control. So how exactly does it work? Well, kind of visualize a series of interlocking gears, each one turning in a different direction and rotating the next. You start out, and I'm not going to, for this workshop, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of this, but you start out at the policy level looking 3 to 5 years out, and you see at the bottom in red, you have what are our key missions? Then rotate around, what are the strategies that we will deploy? Up to the top, what are our measurable objectives? And then around to the right, you have who are the teams that will carry these out. Next, you go on down to the annual level, and you see the strategies that were to the left on a 3 to 5 year X matrix, now are down here at the bottom. And they're the starting point. These different strategies rotate around to goals, objectives, and individual names and responsibilities. And you'll also see in the corners the black and white and hashtag cells. And what those are is that's a visual cue to show the relationship between sections of the matrix. So in other words, if you look at strategy 1 at the bottom and goal 1, that's blackened out. That means there's a direct correlation between that goal and the first strategy. You go over to goal 2, but stay on strategy, that's blank. So that means there's no correlation to that particular goal. And if you drop down a level, you'll see, okay, goal 2 is directly supportive of strategy 2. But now let's stay on the second row. Let's look at goal 1. You see there's a hashtag. So even though goal 1 directly supports strategy 1, it also, to some extent, supports strategy 2. So there is a correlation there. It's not a direct correlation, but there's a correlation. So you've got the hash there. So that lets you know if you're lagging in meeting and supporting your first strategy, you say, well, what were our goals here that directly support that? You know where to look. It points you where to look to see how you're doing against your plans. And it's similar as you rotate around the X matrix. And you'll see added on the next level down are metrics or targets. So we've got these goals, but what are we measuring to make sure that we're going to hit these goals and these objectives? And one example I like to use is, so well, if you've got a measurable goal, well, what's the difference between a measurable goal and an objective? Well, think about the speed limit, depending on where you are, but let's just say 70 miles per hour is your speed limit. That's your measurable objective, but your metric is your speedometer. You know, how are we doing against that measurable objective? Let's see what 9001-2015 says about the environment. Environment for operation of processes. The organization shall determine, provide, and maintain the environment necessary for the operation of its processes and to achieve conformity of products and services. It also talks about the process approach. Understanding and managing interrelated processes as a system contributes to the organization's effectiveness and efficiency in achieving its intended results. This approach enables the organization to control the interrelationships and the interdependencies among the processes of the system. So this is describing the benefits of the process approach. Now, what exactly is a process? So we understand the process approach. What exactly is a process? Well, a process is an activity. It's an activity that transforms inputs. For this slide, we're using the 6 M's: man, machine, material, method, measurement, mother, nature. The reason that we use those 6 M's is that years ago, someone way smarter than I decided that just about all of the inputs to a process would fit into one of these buckets. So you have these process inputs, you have an activity that takes place which transforms them. And then your process output is going to be whatever the product or service is, required records. If it's an electronic system or a computer system, it may be a signal of some sort. And then finally, consequences or risk. Because with any activity, there's always a risk. There's a risk that something could go wrong with the process. There's a risk that someone could be injured, that something could be forgotten. There's always some risk, so you need to understand that. Recognize it and determine, do we need to mitigate them? Now, the power of the process map also, by identifying these inputs, we also take the first step in doing troubleshooting if something goes wrong. Because as quality professionals, we understand that problems with outputs, 99.9% of the time, tie back to problems with the inputs. Here we have a value stream map. This provides a 30,000-foot view of the organization, starting with customer orders, where information flows across the top from right to left, and then physical product flows across the bottom from left to right. But it shows ordering, shipment from the supplier to the warehouse, processing within the organization, shipment back to the customer, and it gives you an overall view. It gives you visibility to those factors outside of your walls that could impact you and where risks may lie. As you identify value-added and non-value-added steps through the key here on the bottom, you also start to identify where risks might lie if there's an overabundance of non-value-added cycle time in a particular area. SIPOC diagrams, which stands for Supplier Input Process Output Customer. It's a diagram used to analyze a process, its inputs, outputs, suppliers, and customers. Its most important purpose is to establish boundaries or scope, define any gaps in knowledge, and define any gaps in knowledge. So how does this support risk? There's a gap as you're filling out the SIPOC diagram. If you start to identify gaps in knowledge, here's where risk lies. Because remember that definition of risk: uncertainty. Uncertainty comes from what? Lack of knowledge. So as you use the SIPOC to identify these gaps in knowledge, you're going to find areas of risk as well. Here's an example of a SIPOC diagram. You have your information across the top: process name, process owner. And you have the date and revision. Remember, many of these documents that we create, most of these documents are living documents. That's why they all have revision levels. So they should be updated as more information is brought in. And they should also be evaluated periodically just to be sure that they maintain relevancy. On this form, we have who was this process facilitated by as they were creating the SIPOC, who was input provided by or the team member, or any important notes. And then you'll see going from left to right, you have suppliers. Who are supplying these inputs? You have what are the inputs to the process? Any requirements for specific key inputs? And then you have your process map. Your inputs, the process, and this is at a very high level, process, and then your outputs. And the key to understand here is that the input or the first step and the output or the last step of the SIPOC should match. If you've done a process map as well, they should match, because the SIPOC is just providing additional detail. So your P map or process map and your SIPOC diagram should match as far as starting point and exit point for the process or the boundaries. Going over to the next column, you have outputs. What are the outputs from this process? What are the requirements for these outputs? And then customers. So you may have some, if you have a product line where there are configurations, you may have certain customers, same base product, but with different requirements. So it's important to map all this out. The SIPOC is a very important tool for just understanding what you have to do to meet your obligations. And then equally importantly, it's a very good troubleshooting tool, because if there is a problem, you can look back and say, well, if there was a problem with a specific input, it's been determined. Now it's going to point you to, well, who supplied that input? Are there multiple suppliers? Do we need to do further analysis? So again, it's a great planning aid, but also a great troubleshooting aid as well. My own mantra: don't collect data if you aren't going to plot it. Don't plot data if you aren't going to analyze it. Don't analyze data if you aren't going to do anything with what you learn. Too often when I'm out as a lead auditor, we'll see companies with lots of charts, beautiful charts, they're tracking this, they're tracking that, but then nothing's being done, and they're reviewed. They're reviewed in management review, but there's never an analysis. We've drawn a conclusion based on this data. This is what we're going to do based on this data. So really, it's important as you look at your environment around you that you ask yourself, well, what data are we collecting? How does it tie to the organizational goals? There should be some sort of link. And how does this help mitigate risk? Because you're looking to support goals at the same time as mitigate risk, and you're collecting data to do that. So when you look at this data being collected, who uses it? Why are we collecting it? Does it support the organizational goals? Does it help manage risk? All questions you need to ask. And this is what ISO 9001:2015 says about analysis and evaluation. Analyze and evaluate appropriate data. So what is appropriate? That comes from planning, understanding context of your organization and risk to that organization. Because when you're looking at analyzing leading indicators, that's how you're managing risk. And when you look at analyzing lagging indicators, that's how you analyze performance. Visual devices are another risk management tool, or rather another lean tool that can help manage risk. So the visual device is an apparatus, mechanism, item, or thing that influences, directs, limits, or controls behavior by making important information visible at a glance without speaking a word. Let's look at some examples. And often visual, it's important to incorporate visual management as part of your planning, but often it comes about as a result of something bad happening. So here you see the sign. If you hit this sign, you will hit that bridge. Obviously, someone didn't pay attention in the past. This, how many of you recognize what this is? Well, it's a pull tab. So if you're ever locked in your trunk, you can pull a tab, it'll pop, and it'll get out. And whenever I see these things, I was, well, who is it that climbs in their trunk and pulls this down? I mean, aside from an occasional child that you have to worry about, what group of people necessitated these tags on thousands of cars? You know, what is the purpose? What are they trying to avoid with this visual device? And then it dawned on me. Many of you will recognize this image from Silence of the Lambs. But, you know, if you're ever captured by a serial killer and he stuffs you in the trunk of your car, boom, you can pop and get out. And when I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues from Europe, they said, you know, most of our cars don't have those. And I said, well, that's probably just because you don't have as many serial killers. But at any rate, visual management can, as you can see, help manage risk and avoid very unfortunate circumstances. Control charts, why do we use them? To monitor a process, to assess whether your process is in control. And the key to control limits is that once you go out of control, you still have time to rein your process back in before you go out of specification. So just by its very function, this is a risk management tool. And again, the reason for this webinar is that it's important for us as quality professionals to understand, well, how do these different tools work that we see in use out on the workplace, but also why are they important? And how can we articulate this when we're trying to sell our system to a customer that's visiting, or explain our process to an auditor from outside, maybe a regulator? There are different types of control charts. You have variable and attribute. You have related charts such as run charts and pre-control charts. Most commonly used attribute charts, which attribute are up, down, yes, no type of data or counts. So you have P chart, NP chart, the U chart, and the C chart are the most common ones. And the most commonly used variable charts are the IMR, or individual moving range, and the X-bar-R chart. Now, variable charts plot continuous data, such as data that can be weighed or measured, length in inches, weight in pounds, that sort of thing. You know, you get numbers like 2.938. These are all plotted on variable charts. IMR is really a combination of two charts. Individual units that are being measured on one chart, and then a range between measurements on a lower chart. The X bar chart is two charts where you have subgroups, where you're picking a sampling of products with each sample. So you may pick 4 to 5 instead of 1. And the range is the range of values within that sample, and that's plotted on a separate chart. When you're talking about risk management, you're also talking about identifying trends in advance, negative trends, so that you can respond before something bad happens. Why is this important? And how does Lean and Six Sigma help? Well, let's take a look at these numbers here. Had it up for a few seconds. Is there anything obvious that jumps out at you? How about now? Can you really tell the difference between A, B, and C? Is there anything that maybe jumps out at you now that we've highlighted in yellow a couple of cells? How about now? The power of visual tools. You can see B is an optimal scenario, A is trending upward, C is trending downward at a glance. So it's a powerful, informative tool. And it's also important when you're doing presentations for upper management to include as many visuals, relevant visuals as you can, because you can convey so much more information, so much more powerfully through visual imagery. So, recap of key thoughts. Different frameworks or thought systems will support and not compete with one another when they share philosophy, cultural enablers, complementary tools and methods. Improvement and risk management are two sides of the same coin. Improvement reduces risk, while the act of improving carries its own risk. Visual management systems are a powerful tool that helps summarize and present data in a meaningful way to management. Now, in conclusion, by allowing different thought systems and their organizational components to engage with one another, synergies will develop, creating a more effective hybrid philosophy, elevating the continual improvement and risk management processes. Such an evolution will benefit the company, customer, suppliers, and the community at large. What are our next steps? Now we've been through this webinar, we've had this discussion. What should you look to do when you go back to your organizations? If you are not in operational excellence, if you're a quality professional or a manufacturing professional, use the tools regularly that you've learned. Don't let them atrophy. You will find value in their use. So too often we go through these classes, we get excited, and then we go back and if we don't have a huge project, we don't use the tools. But these tools are standalone. They can be used within the context of a project, but they can provide important value just used on a day-to-day basis to mine information or to address individual problems. If you're in OpEx, reach across the aisle to quality and ask how you can be of assistance with improving those particular support processes. Try to engage. Often OpEx is within operations or production or engineering, and so see if you can improve the relationship with quality. You may have a good one already, but see if you can become even closer and work more closely with quality. Look for those opportunities. If you are in quality, seek out Lean Six Sigma training, even if it's not included in your job description. Become a big Q professional, not just quality of the product, quality of the process as well. Promote an individual as well as organizational journey of continual improvement. Thank you very much for your time today. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Lance. I want to thank you for taking your time out to share with us some very important and interesting information regarding the application of lean risk management. We do have a couple questions, one of which, the first one, I believe you answered it, but maybe you could re-summarize and dig a little bit more into it, which is, how does an organization which may have multiple approaches operating in different areas avoid the risk for potential conflicts that may inevitably arise?
Okay, thank you. Well, again, you have to, the key phrase here is you have different methodologies, different practices, but let's start with commonality. What are the common goals? Do you have common goals? Yes, because we're all looking help the organization succeed. So start with a point of commonality, get agreement that we are looking to accomplish the same thing. And then look for those cultural enablers, look for the tools that can be used to support one another, similar tools that might be used, maybe certain tools that are more commonly used in the quality department might be of use to OpEx professionals and vice versa. So look where there are synergies. How can one organization use the tools of another organization? Find opportunities to work together, find those commonalities, and then see if you can, so that the mindset is not one of competing for resources, but how can we all leverage our skills together to take advantage of the available resources? So the short answer is seeking commonality, using the thought process of tools, philosophy, cultural enablers, and what are your goals?
Yeah, thank you. I think leadership plays a really strong role in this too, don't you think? That leaders must recognize that they have to find common goals and anticipate these potential conflicts using the principles you just discussed.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, very, absolutely. It starts with leadership. Because when you talk about Lean Six Sigma, QMS, any significant effort, that's going to require cross-functional involvement. It's going to require people taking time away from their quote-unquote day jobs. It's going to take some sort of resources. It may take training. And who owns these resources? That's leadership. Who breaks down the silos? That's leadership. So yes, leadership has to recognize these potential conflicts or risk, and then they have to be often they will have to be the facilitator to ensure that the functions play nice together and be there to remove roadblocks.
Great, thank you. One last question. In your experience, how often would you recommend reviewing and updating existing risk management plans, such as failure mode and effects analysis?
I would say ideally at least once a year, though that's not always practical. But I would say you should never go more than 2 years, because too much can happen. Also, you have to have make sure you have built into your system that when certain things occur, there's going to be a review. So if you're making a major product change, then you should not only amend the failure mode and effects analysis to address the changes, but you should take that opportunity to just do an overall review of everything at that point. And maybe if 10 months into the year, you've gone through that process, then maybe you don't have to do the scheduled review at the 12-month point. So you have to do it so it makes sense. But I would say ideally once a year, no more than 2 years. But whenever you have a major overhaul, you should just take that opportunity to look at the entire FMEA and not just the things being changed.
Excellent. Well, again, I want to thank you, Lance, for taking your time to share with us all this information. There's a lot there. As I said earlier, Lance's presentation has been recorded and will be posted on the ASQ Lean Enterprise Division YouTube channel in the next couple days. I also want to remind you that on September 12th at 1:30 Eastern, 10:30 Pacific time, Aaron Lord, Lisette Contreras, and Alan Noss will be presenting our next webinar entitled Gain a Competitive Edge in Retailing Through Lean Warehousing. We also have the Lean Practitioner Summit coming up November 1st and 2nd in Pomona, California. Day one will be tours of Michael Kors warehousing, Hayward Pools, Pomona Valley Hospital, and Gideon, a manufacturing facility. Day two will have 4 workshops on practical application of Lean, including Gemba Walks, Lean Supply Chain, Toyota Kata, and Lean Leadership. Thanks to everyone for participating in today's webinar, and have a great day.